All right, so this is the Conscious Queries podcast. I am your host, Dominic Persicino. We're here in the studio with our main man, Steven. How you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing terrific.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Cheers.
So I really appreciate you coming. Why don't we get just you started with a little bit of an introduction? Let everybody know who you are, and we'll kind of take it away from there with your stories.
Cool. Okay. So my name is Stephen Walker. I'm 23 years old from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I guess sort of the reason I'm here and sort of the main pursuit in my life is whitewater kayaking. And so I've traveled all over North America, chasing whitewater rivers and doing all kinds of crazy things. So I've grown up in Winnipeg and then again had the opportunity to do all kinds of stuff all over the place and have a few adventure stories to share with you all.
That's really great. So, Manitoba has a lot of rivers and a lot of places to go kayaking. That's really one of the greatest part about it. Yeah. People don't really think about that when they think about the prairies.
For sure.
But we have a lot of lakes and a lot of rivers. And I mean, it's Canada, so it is what it is, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I'd say like a lot of people don't. Whitewater paddlers are kind of few and far between around here, and it really comes down to the fact that like a lot of people don't know there are whitewater rivers to paddle in these places. So a lot of people go on vacation out west to go whitewater rafting on rivers in the Banff area and that sort of thing. Meanwhile, we have all kinds of pretty world-class stuff here in and around Winnipeg-ish area. I'd say you got to go at least like an hour and a half-ish away out of town, and even better stuff further up north. So stuff that's kind of like harder to access and maybe sort of less mainstream for that reason. But yeah, definitely, it's pretty top-notch around here.
That's good. And so what kind of kayak are you rocking right now?
Yeah, so this is a funny one. So a lot of people think, I guess when we talk about kayaking, they imagine that we paddle like these super long, crazy long kayaks.
Not whitewater rafting.
Yeah, not whitewater rafting. That's also a good distinction to make, because a lot of people, they say, oh, like this is the guy who's into whitewater rafting, and it's very much not whitewater rafting. So whitewater rafting, for the most part, is what you do as a tourist, where you get to like just take up a seat in a boat, and their guide does kind of all the work, and you just paddle here and there. Whitewater kayak is about 8 feet long, so a fraction of the size of whitewater raft, and it's piloted by one person and not a team of rafters type thing. So and again, like I mentioned before, a lot of people, when they imagine kayaking, they imagine these huge long watercraft where you can like paddle with a beer between your legs across a lake. The kayaks we paddle are very small, so most of them around like the 8 foot, 9 foot mark. Some even smaller than that, depending on the purpose and depending on the type of whitewater kayaking that you're doing.
Yeah.
And they're made of like kind of hard, tough plastic, so they can bounce off rocks and do all kinds of stuff like that. So I have a bit of a collection of kayaks, and that's sort of the name of the game. You kind of collect a kayak for different types of rivers and different types of river situations. But got about 5 boats in the garage right now.
That's really nice. That's cool.
Pretty common, yeah. my parents aren't too happy with that. But.
No kidding. Yeah. I have just a couple of like amateur kayaks, just like a 1-seater and a 2-seater kayak. Nothing too fancy. So I mean, they're nice to go take out on the lake.
For
but
sure.
They're not nothing you can take out really on hardcore stuff.
And that's the main difference. I'd say like the main difference from a recreational or like flat water type kayak and a whitewater one is that like a whitewater boat would have like a pretty heavy duty like
a skirt
cockpit rim and a skirt over top, so you're kind of like locked in and sealed in, and they also fit quite a bit differently, so you're pretty locked in there. They're designed to like be an extension of your body, so you can adjust them so that like it's basically you're pretty much locked in, and it's like you can control every aspect of it. So
because it's a lot smaller, and it's like the snub ends, so that you can tumble and then just get yourself back up if you fall inside.
Yeah, they look pretty wild. They look. Yeah, like I've heard all kinds of crazy people call them crazy things, different sorts of things. But yeah, they look like really short and stubby and pretty different. And the truth is, they don't really handle the flat water well. Like they're designed for a pretty specific purpose. So if you wanted to go cruise around a lake in one of them, they're
not for the like speed Olympics.
Yeah,
of
exactly.
kayaking.
Exactly.
They're for rivers.
Exactly, and they're pretty tippy and that sort of thing. So it definitely takes some getting used to.
That's kind of like a Jeep, right?
Yeah.
A Jeep making a turn on like a regular street, it just falls over really easily. But supposedly in the mountains, it's really good.
Exactly, and essentially, you wouldn't take a Jeep driving through downtown Toronto, right?
Supposedly, you're not supposed to. But some people do.
Some people do, right? Yeah, definitely. That's the thing. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Cool.
Well, so what kind of adventures have you been up to in the last while? Have you done any good traveling?
Yeah, for sure. So the main kind of noteworthy expedition I'd say in the last little while was in this past July. Some friends and I, it's an expedition that's been in the works for a few years now, but we actually went up to northern Saskatchewan. And so again, when you think of Saskatchewan, for the longest time, I also thought of Saskatchewan as just the flattest place on earth. But if you go north, and if you go way, way north, there's actually some pretty incredible places to explore. And so we actually drove about 25 hours from Winnipeg. So we drove pretty much to the road ends in the hustling, bustling town of Stony Rapids, Saskatchewan, which is basically about like 80 kilometers south of the Northwest Territories. And then from there, we got in a float plane and flew up to northwest of Lake Athabasca and paddled the river on the North Shore of Lake Athabasca up there.
Nice. That's
So,
awesome.
Yeah, pretty crazy. Like a lot of time and money invested into getting up there, and kind of all on like a hope that this river would be worth it, and it was 100% worth it. So it was pretty incredible.
That's great. And if you've ever been to the Badlands in Saskatchewan, that's like, that's not something you think about the prairies either.
Yeah.
It's really nice area, and then you go see the dinosaurs and all that.
Crazy. I've never been to the Badlands, to be honest. I've just driven somewhat kind of through. But yeah,
Canada's like Grand Canyon. It's not so grand, but it's a canyon, right?
For sure, for sure. Yeah, Canada's incredibly diverse, and that's the sort of thing. These provinces get a rap for what you see off the Trans-Canada, but it doesn't take much to venture off that main highway and find some pretty incredible places.
Exactly.
Definitely.
And I mean, how risky does it get when you get down there? How what's the closest phone call you got? What was the deal with that?
Yeah, so in northern Saskatchewan, that's probably like the most remote I've ever been, and I spend a lot of time in areas where there's no cell service, and I spend a lot of times in areas where there's no road access and that sort of thing. So in Saskatchewan, for example, we were dropped off by float plane and then pretty much made some loose arrangements to get picked up by a boat 5 days later. And so like we had a satellite phone in case things hit the fan, but like aside from that, even then, if someone was to get injured, like, to be honest, a helicopter, we've heard stories of other guys getting rescued up there, and a helicopter would probably take like 2 days to find you. So ultimately, like, you're pretty much alone, and you pretty much rely on the team you're with. So I was with 3 other guys, all really experienced and knew what they're doing, and as a team, we sort of worked down a river and made it to the end. And so we were paddling a river that's never really been paddled before.
Yeah.
So with that comes a lot of unknown and a lot of like significant physical hardship and a lot of really scary situations. But for the most part, again, as a team, you sort of manage it and get down to the bottom in one piece.
No kidding. You don't want to get to a waterfall at some point and being like, oh shit.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so we actually, like, to be honest, I love waterfalls, and that's sort of what we go up there when we're looking for waterfalls. And so that being said, not all waterfalls are good to go. And when you're paddling a river that you've never paddled before, it's sort of hard for people to imagine. But imagine you're drifting down a river, and like there's just all kinds of blind corners, and you really have no idea what's around the next corner. And so in northern Saskatchewan, we sort of had some pretty crazy times because the river gets pretty locked in and sort of cliffed in on either side. So you'd be going through sections where like it'd be kind of smooth cliffs on either side, and you'd be flowing along, and all of a sudden you see the horizon line drop off, and someone would try to scurry up the side of the cliff to get a peek at it and see how it looked. And if it looked good, we'd all make our way down, and if it didn't, we'd all have to figure out a way to get out of the canyon and around the rapid and then back down to the river. So it gets pretty crazy at times, and it's kind of hard to imagine that sort of feeling, and it's something that I sort of like never really knew until I started doing this kind of stuff. But yeah, the feeling of like total unknown and total like just going with the flow, essentially.
No kidding. Well, just doing, I remember doing a canoe trip from Whitehorse to Dawson City. It's like a good 5-7 days of cool. And even that, it's a really well-known route to do, but even then, it's at to the point where it is kind of risky just on its own. Just like there's some little white water, little rapids, but nothing like too intense, especially for a canoe.
Totally.
And it's more of a environmental risks, or the whole picture of you break your leg, there's nobody to freaking unless your buddies can carry you out, you're on your own. Definitely. And it is a crazy idea to have when you're in the wilderness.
For sure, man. Yeah. For sure. Yeah, no, that's definitely one of those things where like we had a few situations over the years. I've had a few situations, but even on that trip where like a split-second decision by one of my friends, and next thing you know, he like mangled his hand so bad that like to the point where if you were near a hospital, you'd probably get stitches. But because we're so far from one, we just like duct taped them up and kept going. And that was on day one, right?
Wow.
And so it's one of these things where like the moment you let your guard down and sort of like relax a little too much, and the river will pretty quickly like set you back on course.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and again, just the fact
Mother
that you're
Nature
remote.
tells you who's boss.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's one thing like I spent a lot of time, especially when I was a little younger in my paddling career, like paddling really dangerous rivers, but like that were all roadside. So it's one thing where like you're doing something really dangerous, but like within, like eyesight of the river is a road, and you can walk out to that road and get help in no time.
Yeah.
It sort of changes the dynamic when you're like all of a sudden 3 days from the nearest road, or like 4 days from the nearest road, or 8 days from the nearest road, and then all of a sudden now it adds a whole new level of complexity and a whole new level
You have
of
to
risk.
bring all your food and your water in and out.
Totally.
Or did you like have a filter? Or how did you
so
get your water?
That's a really cool question. On this river in particular, we actually, I'm not super familiar with northern Saskatchewan. It was our first time up there, and we were going, the other two of the guys I was with were from Manitoba, and the other guy was from northern Saskatchewan. And so we normally bring with us a SteriPen. So it's like a UV light filter. You fill up a water bottle in the river, you stir the pen in for a minute, and it kills all the bacteria that can make you sick. But it's pretty crazy. Usually in Manitoba, you just use it for like what we call beaver fever, or like E. coli when beavers on the river. But the guy in northern Saskatchewan, he's like, you guys are going to bring a water filter? Like, don't bring a water filter. You don't need that. And so we were drinking straight from the river, crisp, clean water. You can't get that water that fresh anywhere else. It was awesome. So we were getting an area pretty remote, pretty far from any sort of industry development or anything like that. So it was like about as clean of water as you can get.
No kidding.
Awesome,
I remember being able to do that. It's really fun.
It's so awesome.
It's really nice. I mean, at a certain point, you have to think, oh, maybe there's some there's something in the water.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you got a gut bacteria to take care of it. So.
For sure, man. For sure. Yeah, no, it was honestly like one of these things where I brought a water bottle and I wish I didn't, because most of the time we just had like a coffee cup and just like dip it in, take a sip, keep going. Never been so hydrated in my life.
Canada is a really unique place like that where you can do that. There's, not that many other places in the world I can think of where, maybe anywhere there's mountains, but other than that, there's...
Yeah, we're incredibly fortunate for that, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, no, definitely.
So other than your kayaking career, anything else exciting going on, man?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I finished school, graduated from university last spring, and I have a degree in environmental studies, so somewhat related. I like spending time outside. I like learning about things in the outdoors, so it sort of fit with what I was doing. But to be honest, in the last little while, I picked up a bit of work in the fall and did some work related to my field in the last little while. And then, I'm sort of just now looking forward to the next paddling trip and sort of lining up some big things for next year. And sort of while I can do it, while I'm in physical condition to do it, and while I'm in this stage of my life where I can get away with being a kayak bum for a little while, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So
that's awesome. So, when you're doing this, do you camp on the side of the bank, and do you like to sleep in the tent or outside in the stars?
It depends on the situation. So northern Saskatchewan, anytime, for anyone who's been in northern Canada in July, the bugs are insane. Yeah. So they go after certain people more than others. So thankfully, I don't swell up too bad when I get bites and stuff. My friends were all ballooned right up with crazy black fly bites. And so these black flies, not even mosquitoes up there, it's just these black flies that take a chunk out of you every time they bite you, and they kind of like to go behind your ears and get in every crevice and that sort of thing. So up there, you can't sleep under the stars. It's just not possible. You get eaten alive. But we always camp on the side of the river and make our way down. So in that particular river situation, we're on the river for 5 days. So 5 plus and a couple extra because we got weather bound for a few days at the end. But so we were sleeping on the side of the river every day, which is pretty sweet. And this particular section of the river, because no one had ever paddled it, there's not established campsites or anything like that. So oftentimes we ended up in a few situations where we'd push past a potentially suitable site, or just a little piece of flat rock next to the river, and then we'd end up in another canyon and end up paddling for a few more hours before we could find another somewhat flat spot on the side of the river. Yeah. So it ended up being pretty crazy. And up there, the trees aren't very big because we're kind of near the end of the tree line, but there's a lot of little trees, and so we'd have to use sod to clear a few of them and just lay our tents wherever we could. We rarely ever slept level. Oftentimes you're kind of sliding around in the tent because you're on whatever somewhat flat ground you could sleep on. But
yeah, that's a luxury you don't find very often in nature, is level flat areas.
That's for sure.
That's definitely an
Yeah.
advancement for
Even
us.
even a place to put pegs in the tent. You know, like we have pegs in
Yeah.
our tent, but rarely ever use them because you're often sleeping on like sheer rock. You know,
Rocks,
there's
yeah,
nothing
yeah.
nothing to kind of peg your tent down. So yeah, no, it's definitely on that trip in particular, the camping was definitely not luxurious. It was pretty bare bones. And
Was there any like wildlife? Did you see any
we
moose
saw
or bears?
we saw
or anything?
bears. Yeah, we found a few caribou antlers and that sort of thing, which is pretty awesome. We didn't see any caribou on that trip, but I've seen them on other trips and that sort of thing. But yeah, no, we saw a couple bears, which was awesome. But no issues with bears. Honestly, we were in an area so remote that like the wildlife was all pretty afraid of us because they'd never seen us before. So yeah, pretty cool.
That's cool.
Yeah,
I remember a story when I was back in the Yukon when I was doing that paddle trip.
Yeah.
It was me and my bunch of cadet buddies.
Cool.
And we were doing the paddle, and we were doing exactly what you were saying, trying to find a place to stay for the night.
Yeah.
And we found like a really nice island in the middle of the river, and we're like, oh my god, it's this little secluded island. This is perfect. Nothing can like get at us during the night. And we're like, sweet. So we get on the island, and we're starting like to untent everything. We're putting up our tents. We're starting the fires, and then we just hear somebody come out of the tree line saying, "Bear, bear, bear," and we're like, "What? We're like, there's a bear over there," and we're like, "Oh no!" And then so we're like, "All right, get to the boats, everybody, get to the boats." So we would get everybody and all the stuff to the boats, and we just like freaking get off right on time, as this giant grizzly bear comes out and like charges us, and then as we're like still kicking off, they're still coming after us, even after we like used pepper spray. We were throwing rocks, and it was still coming at us. And we're like, "Oh shit, man! This thing is really fucking. Is really coming for us." And we're like, "Holy smokes! Like, what are we gonna do?" And yeah, that was a very life-changing moment. You know, you realize nature is not out there to be your friend. You know,
exactly. You're not at the top of the food chain all the time.
Not always.
Yeah.
And we're like, we're like 15, 20 people. A bear, come on, there were 15, 20 people.
Yeah.
And the bear was like, I don't care. And we're like, we're on an island in between the river. Like, there's nothing on here.
Yeah.
Wrong. There was a bear on the island.
No
so
kidding.
we were like,
Yeah.
what is going on? So yeah, that was interesting. And then, I remember they were like, all right, guys, don't tell anyone you almost died. It's like, okay. It's like,
Keep it
or
hush,
else we can't do this program anymore. So you got to keep it on the wraps. We're like, how often does this happen, man?
Awesome.
I was like, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it's often like classic. Don't tell your parents. Don't tell your parents what just happened. Yeah. That was my childhood in a nutshell.
No kidding.
Don't tell mom and dad.
Oh man,
Epic,
that's
dude.
sweet.
Yeah, bears are no joke, man. It's for sure. But yeah, grizzly bears are one thing, but like we're starting to dabble in the areas where like polar bears are starting to play a factor, and so that's a whole new ball game, man. Whole new ball game.
Polar bears are probably the worst, and the grizzlies and polars are the worst. Black bears not so much.
Yeah, black bears are for the most part pretty harmless, and I'd say like I'd be more worried to see a black bear in like a well-trafficked area because they're used to people and that sort of thing.
That's right.
Then again, it kind of depends on the situation, but yeah, certain black bears, depending on how desperate they are, will give you a bit of grief. But no, for the most part, it's smooth sailing.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's always interesting how like trapping works and how like the park services they track all the wildlife, and
Totally.
when they track and they tag them, after we had that incident with that grizzly, the guide was like, "Oh, we did a report and they took care of that grizzly." I was like, "What do you mean?" They took care of it. I'm like, "What's going on?" They're like, "Oh, we can't have that where the tourists are." And we're like, "What?" So you're gonna remove the bear? So basically, they tranquilize the bear, they pick it up with the chopper, and then they move it
somewhere else
in Alaska where there's no roads.
Oh yeah,
That's
crazy.
like wow.
Wow, it's sort of, to be honest, that makes me kind of sad to have to like manipulate nature so that it doesn't inconvenience us on our travels. You know, I'm sort of not about that, but you're right. It is the way, man. People aren't equipped or aren't ready to run into some danger in the wilderness. So like they gotta make it.
Well, everybody once they get there, they're like, it always has to be mine, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It can never be anybody else's. Hold on.
Sorry, dude. I'm right in my foot. So you're saying
Sorry about that. What was I saying?
ownership, wilderness, along those lines.
That's what you get. Nick, how you doing over there?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm
You
just
chilling. Said a word
I
yet.
haven't. Steven,
Yeah.
would you mind talking about that Mexican river that you ran?
Oh, okay.
That you ran, because that was one thing that I thought would be pretty cool if you talked about.
Cool,
That was some interesting stuff right there.
Yeah. So in the winter of 2018, I went down to Mexico, but not what you'd think of Mexico, not the beaches or, the resorts and that sort of thing. I basically flew to Mexico City and then got in a bus and rode about 8 hours, a couple buses, 8 hours from Mexico City up into the mountainous region of Mexico, in the state of Veracruz, the town of Tlapacoyan, which is like a pretty small town, and the kind of town where you'd never go there unless you were a whitewater kayaker.
Nice.
It's sort of like the kind of town that's appeared in a few whitewater kayaking magazines, or a region that's appeared in a few whitewater kayaking magazines. Famous for its like crazy big waterfalls in the jungle. So again, lots of elevation and some rivers coming off the mountains that are like crazy, crazy steep and crazy, crazy dangerous. And again, as a kid flipping through whitewater kayaking, or as a teenager flipping through whitewater kayaking magazines, I have seen pictures of that area for a little while. And so again, a couple years ago, or 2 years ago, basically decided that like I'd kind of see what it's all about and head down there. So it's kind of on a whim. Basically, like the U of M profs went on strike. I just like booked a ticket, flew down there, sorted out the boat situation once I got down there, and then ended up paddling for 7 days, a bunch of rivers in the jungle, which was pretty wild.
Wow.
The rivers were super scary.
Yeah.
And yeah, for sure, like some of the scariest whitewater I've ever seen. Where like the threshold of what's runnable in a whitewater kayak is just totally different than here. So whitewater is typically classed from like 1 to 5, 1 to 6. Class 6 being like if you run it you will die. Class 5 being like the moves are really hard and the consequences really high, and then kind of getting progressively easier down to 1, which is just like easy peasy, kind of you can float down it type deal.
Mm-hmm.
So the rivers there, what you'd call class 5 in Canada or class 5 in North America, is very much different than class 5 down there. Class 5 down there is like really, really, really big waterfalls.
Wow.
Really, really crazy jungle gorges and all kinds of wild stuff. So there, like, it's normal for guys, not me, but guys to run 70-foot waterfalls every day, which is insane.
Wow.
It's insane. But we ran a bunch of waterfalls down there, ran a bunch of rivers, which is pretty incredible, and managed to stay safe for the most part. That being said, sort of I think the story Nick's alluding to here is I got deathly ill down there, which is sort of the norm. I guess people, when you go to Mexico, people say, oh, don't drink the tap water, like don't brush your teeth with the tap water. But like imagine swallowing straight river water as your whitewater kayaking. You can't help it. It just happens. It goes in your nose and down your throat, whatever it is. And so you're swallowing straight river water. And like basically it's normal that like people say, I was down there for 7 days. People say like go for 14 because 7 of those you'll be sick.
Oh, I see.
That kind of thing. So I got sick on like day 3 or 4, but like only took 1 day off and then kept paddling despite being super sick. And then when I got home, I was like recovering for another like probably a month, to be honest, before I got normal. And even then it was still like touch and go for a little while.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the 14 days weren't done with.
Yeah, exactly. I still got sick early. Yeah, exactly. So
what was the quickest run you guys did for a river with it?
Like the rivers there, it kind of depends. There's a bunch of different sections, and most sections are on one river called the Yasaseca, which is one river, but there's a bunch of different sections of that same river. Super famous. There's crazy waterfalls. The tallest waterfall in that river is 110 feet, and the guys have run it. It's been run a few times. It's crazy. So crazy. I would never do that in my life. But there's a couple other sections like upstream of that and downstream of that are awesome, and like we would bomb laps of a certain section. And I was actually there for a race at the time. That was the second last day I was there. There was a whitewater kayaking race down this section. So yeah, got to race that. And that section, like the race course section, you'd crush out in like 15 minutes kind of deal. But it's like a super steep, couple waterfalls in there, a couple 20-footers, a couple 30-footers, kind of deal in the race course, which is pretty wild. But yeah, paddlers from all over the world kind of make their way down there, so it's pretty crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. There's literally just like one hostel outside of town that like paddlers come to. That's it. Like you walk through town, there's like no other tourists, just whitewater kayakers.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But
That's really cool.
yeah, kind of a world class type paddling area.
So
Have you done any of it anywhere else outside of North America? Or
I
outside of
paddled in
the-
Costa Rica one time as well.
Okay.
I was quite a bit younger, but yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, so I started traveling to paddle when I was like my first trip away from home when I was 15 years old. So I'm doing it for a little while now, traveling elsewhere, mostly just in Canada, but then Costa Rica and then Mexico. There's a few other places on the destination hotspot kind of list that I'd like to check out, but in recent years I've also started to become more and more fascinated with northern Canada and started to dedicate my time and resources to heading up there.
It's really nice up there.
Yeah, beautiful.
So rewinding a little bit, what you have been kayak instructor. You're Stephen Walker, the kayak instructor. Yeah. So tell us a bit about that and how early on that was going on. And
yeah, so I was super fortunate to have like a lot of mentors older than me that sort of like took me under the wing when I started paddling. And the whitewater paddling community in Winnipeg or Manitoba is super small, so it's really tight knit. And so when I first started paddling at 14, there's a lot of older fellows that in their like 30s or 20s, 30s, 40s, some guys 50s that had full paddling careers and were now starting to kind of transition out of paddling, had families and that sort of thing. They were sort of like really keen to take me under their wing and show me the ropes and kind of get me going, and then are now no longer paddling as much as they used to, and they were sort of the guys that took in the new people. And so now that I'm at in the past few years, now that I'm in a position where I can now teach people to paddle and that sort of thing, and have taken a few courses and got a few certifications to do that, I sort of it's sort of my turn to take that role and teach some people to paddle and continue to grow the sport in Manitoba, because it's definitely the community has struggled just because, again, there's not a lot of awareness about whitewater paddling and a lot of people don't know you can do it here. So yeah, in the last few years we've tried to generate some excitement with young people and get young people into it and kind of increase whitewater.
Yeah, I mean, you got whole staff and website and everything.
Yeah, and to be honest, I've sort of slowed that down in the last little while just because I can get to this later, but I had a pretty significant injury a couple years ago, so since then I had to this past season was my first season back, and so for that reason I sort of had to paddle for myself and kind of get back into it, find the love for it again for myself, and before I can kind of get back into maybe teaching again a little more often next year. I taught a few courses, but not as much as I used to, just because I had to take the time to paddle for myself and kind of get back into it.
That's really nice.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, definitely.
And so, do you take any pictures or videos when you're out there?
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely something that I'm by no means a professional photographer and don't know much about cameras, but I do have a camera and keep it in a dry bag between my legs most of the time. And then take pictures of certain rivers we're on and document those sorts of things. So in Northern Saskatchewan, one of the guys is a big time photographer, so took a bunch of photos and we share those on social media and that sort of thing. And that's a kind of a good way to, people are always like, holy cow, where is that? And when they find out it's Manitoba or Saskatchewan, they have a hard time kind of wrapping their head around that. But yeah, sort of the photos is definitely the way to, if you want to make it as like a professional whitewater kayak or something, you kind of have to have like a pretty slick social media and like some pretty incredible adventure photos. So to be honest, I'd rather, for the most part, paddle without having a camera along, and I do that a lot. But then again, when you're doing something pretty crazy and stuff, it's sort of the norm to have a photo or two of it. We sort of have a rule amongst friends that like you probably shouldn't run a waterfall or rapid if you're not willing to do it without a camera there, to sort of get rid of that like Instagram ego where you're like, well, I need a crazy picture for this week's post, So definitely we have a lot of days where you don't bring cameras along, but certain days where it's sort of the name of the game. You got to kind of document what you've done and kind of share it for sponsorship.
Especially if you're doing something risky, you might as well take a picture,
take a photo,
take a video.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, it's sort of again become sort of the nature of the game. But photos are awesome. I love having photos aside from sharing them online. Like I love having photos of rivers we paddled, and every photo is like a memory. Like it's incredible to kind of look back and sort of document these rivers, and also like when you're trying to grow the sport of paddling, like when you share a photo of a river we paddled in Manitoba and share photos of all the rapids on it, then it gets other people excited to either try it, or other paddlers excited to go check out that river as well. So yeah, kind of interesting.
Have you done any paddling in Alberta?
Oh, certainly, yeah. And so that's sort of like Alberta's like a pretty big paddling hotspot. Some pretty incredible rivers out there, and BC as well. I'd say like my focus has sort of shifted. I used to go out there every spring and paddle a bunch out there every spring, but a lot of the rivers there are roadside classic sections that people have run a million times. So they're really hard and challenging and awesome, but again, they don't have that sort of like unknown aspect. You know exactly, you can read about it online, what's coming around the corner kind of deal.
I see.
So in recent years, I kind of use those rivers to hone my skills and get comfortable in hard whitewater, and then it sort of like shifted my attention more to going north where stuff's unknown and stuff's a little different, right? So that's sort of been in the last, I'd say last 2 years, 2 to 3 years, that's sort of become my focus. But Alberta's incredible, and they have a really vibrant paddling community, and something that I hope someday we could have here. They even have like whitewater parks built in downtown Calgary and just outside of Calgary and stuff. So it's pretty cool. Yeah,
so how does someone get started? Do you start at a 5?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Yeah, oftentimes like when we teach whitewater kayaking, you start someone in flat water, totally really easy stuff, pretty straightforward, nothing crazy, and then kind of ease them into class 1, 2, and then oftentimes like you would never take a student outside of class 3, class 4 and 5. You start dabbling in some pretty technical, pretty challenging stuff, and as soon as like real consequences there, like to be honest, if you're paddling class 2. Class 1, like the only real risk is like you're gonna hit your head on a rock under the water, but you wear a helmet and you wear like full gear for that. Once you start paddling more challenging whitewater, there's much more serious risk of injury or or worse kind of deal, and so we would never take like a student on that until they're no longer in a student type situation, right? But yeah, it's definitely like it's got a pretty steep learning curve. It's not like you can watch like all these sexy videos of guys doing all kinds of crazy stuff, but like you can't do that until you have like a pretty significant skill set before you can start that. So there's definitely like a bit of a steep learning curve to start, but once you kind of get past that a certain point, then it's just like the best pastime in the game.
So compared this to like base jumping or skydiving, how risky is this?
Yeah, so it depends, man. It depends, and to be honest, like it all comes down to like, I don't know, it's hard to say. It all comes down to like what sort of experience you have and like what sort of training you have outside of just the kayaking side of things. So a lot of the guys we paddle with all the time, they have like wilderness first aid certifications, swiftwater rescue training, like lots and lots of training and experience in these sorts of situations, so that like running class 4 or 5 is not out of the question. It's not crazy risky. Like I kind of get insulted when people think like what we do is reckless, because we definitely take like the necessary precautions to do it safely. And to be honest, we paddle class 5 all the time, class 4 or 5 all the time, and don't have issues and can do it comfortably and can do it every day if you wanted to. And so definitely like if you weren't ready for it and you just jumped into that, it'd be a different story and it'd be 100% reckless and that sort of thing. But if you've sort of like worked your way up to that and taken the necessary time to get into that, then it's not as reckless as it might seem.
It's definitely a thrill for sure.
Oh, definitely, yeah. You can't beat the feeling at the bottom of like a crazy drop or something like that. You can't beat that, right? Especially when it's never been done before. Like doing something for the first time ever is like a pretty incredible feeling. And you get to the bottom, it's like incredibly scary at the top, but like the feeling you get at the bottom is like so worth that fear at the top, right? Yeah, it's not often that people like willingly subject themselves to fear. I don't think like only certain people are into that, but like
at that level.
Yeah, yeah. But like again, you work up to it, right? Like when you first start, you don't think you're going to end up doing that kind of thing. And I sort of never thought I'd end up doing the kind of stuff that we've been doing lately. But it's sort of just a progression, a natural progression of anything, right? Anyone could do it if they set their mind to it. Yeah.
That's cool.
That being said, there again, risk of injury. And I've sort of learned that lesson before.
No kidding. Yeah.
So I definitely learned that lesson the hard way.
So do you go hunting as well, or do you bring in all your food?
So most of the time we pack on a kayaking trip. We pack all our food. I've caught fish before and eaten fish before, but kind of a funny story. When we were in northern Saskatchewan, we basically spent all that time on the river. Finished the river on the north shore of Lake Athabasca. We were 130 kilometers from town, and so we kind of chartered a boat, arranged loosely with the guy in town who had the biggest boat, that we'd give him some cash if he came to pick us up. And so basically finished in Lake Athabasca. The river dumps out in Lake Athabasca. Lake Athabasca's pretty big, first of all. In July, the water's 7 degrees Celsius, so it's like freezing cold.
Yeah.
And it's pretty treacherous, like it's pretty open, and it becomes a pretty big body of water. And so it's crazy stormy at the time. In northern Canada, storms come in all the time and can stick around for a few days. So the waves are huge, crashing into shore. We basically realized the boat's not going to come get us in these kind of swells. And so ended up being windbound for 2 days.
Wow.
Completely out of food. And so thankfully on the last day, but right before we ended up getting picked up, my friend caught a huge lake trout, which was awesome. We cut it up,
Wow.
They had lake trout steaks for dinner. It was pretty incredible.
It's the most delicious trout
Yeah,
you've ever
it's the
had.
best food ever. Yeah, I actually rationed one granola bar for so like on the last day I ate a granola bar too and some lake trout. But for the most part, we were like fresh out of food for like a solid 2 days. And when you're not eating, you just like stare at each other like waiting, weather bound. It's like pretty hard on group morale. But yeah, in that particular situation, we like essentially got kind of our hand forced into chartering a flight, which we didn't want, a second flight, which we didn't want to, but the boat guy basically called him a satellite phone, and he's just like, yeah, like the weather's probably not going to clear until Friday, and it was like on Tuesday we'd already been weather bound for 2 days, so we like essentially we're looking at spending like another 4 days looking at each other being hungry. So ended up just like chartering a plane and salvaging what was left of the trip before we just wasting away on the shore there.
No kidding.
That is, yeah.
Yeah. Again, sort of the nature of the game. You can't plan nature to a T. Yeah,
interesting.
Crazy stuff. Yeah, but no,
My goodness.
For the most part, we pack food and dehydrated food and that sort of thing, and do our thing. Yeah, whitewater kayaks again because they're so short. Like you don't have a lot of space in there, so yeah, you're pretty limited in terms of what you can pack.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, definitely.
You live for that.
Yeah, exactly. I think everyone does a little bit. Everyone in their own way, But
That's good.
yeah, again, it's not without risk.
Do you meet any cool people when you're doing that?
All kinds of cool people. Yeah, and I think that's sort of like the part that I would say is the best part. Like growing up, like I had the opportunity to grow up with like people that were. I spent time paddling with people that are in their late 20s, 30s, 40s as like a 15-year-old kid. Not a lot of 15-year-old kids are hanging out with adults all the time. But aside from that, like on a again more kind of anecdotal basis, when we were in northern Saskatchewan, for example, when we were windbound, we ended up paddling along the shore because there's one guy who has a cabin. Basically, his closest neighbor is 70 kilometers away. He's a trapper's cabin, so like a one-room, tiny little cabin on a mining claim that he built with his wife before she passed away. His name's Mike. So we heard rumors of this guy. Didn't know if he was going to be there. Didn't know anything about it. Basically paddled up to his cabin, like hooping and hollering because up there people have shotguns and aren't expecting visitors. And then he ended up coming out amidst the storm, and it was this old fellow invited us in for some coffee. And so this guy basically spends 5 months of the year living on the North Shore Lake Athabasca by himself with his dog.
Wow.
And built a cabin with his wife. She passed away a couple years after. Pretty incredible story, but he was a miner in Uranium City. And so Uranium City is a pretty cool place. If you like history, I'd recommend looking it up.
Yeah.
It's a town on the North Shore Lake Athabasca. Went from like a bustling town of a couple thousand to now a population of about like 4 people, I think. Like tiny, total ghost town. It was at one point like a uranium mining town. And the North Shore Lake Athabasca is pretty famous for uranium and gold. And so it was a hustling, bustling place. And then I can't remember the exact chronology of it, but sort of fell apart after the atom bomb and that sort of thing. The uranium industry sort of took a hit. And I guess people were sort of, not as into funding uranium exploration and mining. And so Uranium City is like completely ghost town. Basically, like overnight became a ghost town. Everyone fled. So this guy and his wife lived there, worked there, had a family there, and basically fled. Kind of got out of there as quick as they could. But he sort of always loved that North Shore Lake Athabasca, and so built this cabin there with his wife. And then, so he welcomed us in. We had coffee. We spent 2 days with him. He didn't have any food to offer us because like he was also running low. So when we chartered that plane, we actually got them to pick up some groceries for him because he was like, he needed to go back to town, but like didn't want to drive his boat in the crazy storm kind of deal.
Yeah.
And so, we just drank coffee for like 2 days straight without food.
Wow.
Yeah. Just because he didn't have much to offer us. So like we just like, I'd stir in honey and milk into the coffee and just like, it was pretty much just honey and milk and like not much coffee, but like any sort of calorie would help.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. But no, he's like a super incredible dude. And we like had the opportunity to like spend like 2 days just talking with him and he sort of shared the history of the area and like shared the history of himself and like just the most incredible person that like chances are I'd probably never meet him and most people wouldn't because he lives half the year by himself out in the middle of nowhere, right? But again, just because we were all stuck in the same spot. And just an opportunity that just presented itself because we paddled this crazy river in the middle of nowhere. I'm sort of like honestly probably the highlight of the whole trip.
Yeah.
Just hanging with him and learning about the area, and it sort of gave us a new appreciation of like the history of the river we just paddled. It was incredible.
Wow.
That's cool.
Yeah. Crazy.
You know, it's really amazing to find, when you're paddling and you come across, like an abandoned settlement or like ruined buildings. I remember passing some of those and I'm like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
and you stop by, and then it's it's a First Nations reserve, and you're talking to the people there, and you're like, oh, this is the old Hudson's Bay Company outpost and the post office, and then we're like,
Sure.
what?
Yeah.
And then you see these stone buildings, and then you see wooden cabins, and then you're like, where's your road? No, there's no road. You're like, what do you mean there's no road? The road is the river.
Yeah.
Like, what? Excuse me?
Unreal.
There's, like, there's no electricity here. There's nothing.
Nothing. Crazy.
You're living off the land.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a way to live, It is
Totally.
it is an interesting life,
Totally.
to be out there. It's it's not for everybody,
No, for sure.
especially for us. We're very connected now.
Yeah.
We've got to be connected. If not, we feel isolated.
Totally.
Even though we're surrounded with human beings everywhere.
Yeah. I feel isolated. No, that's 100%. I know it's funny you say that because like the history of these rivers, it's crazy. So in the whitewater kayaking world, it's sort of fueled by like the idea of what we call a first descent. So like if you want to make it on a cover of a magazine, unless it's like a 70-foot waterfall, it better be a first descent, right? That's sort of like what gets people looking at you and gets people paying attention, right?
Yeah.
And so the whole idea of first descents are interesting because like, especially in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and this is most likely true on many rivers across Canada, is like, it's a pretty bold statement and a pretty false statement to say you're the first person down a river, right? You're probably the first person to run a lot of the rapids on that river, but like,
You're the first person to document.
Yeah, that's exactly
that?
what, right? Yeah. And again, we're in watercraft that are probably a little more versatile and like we can run waterfalls and that sort of thing. But like you were not the first person to travel that section of river, and so it's funny because this river in Saskatchewan, like there's no sign of people. And the interesting story about this is there was actually a group of canoeists, canoe tripper type guys who went in there and they made this like video of the river just before we were gonna head up there. And they sort of said that they were the first people to paddle this river. They got some funding for it, their first descent of this river. And they said they saw no sign of people on the whole thing. And so the thing about whitewater or canoeists and like these tandem tripping canoes is they couldn't run any of their whitewater, so they ended up walking most of the river because it's pretty much all whitewater, which is pretty hilarious in itself. But the statement they made that they didn't see any sign of people was like sort of hard to believe. Again, this river's in the middle of nowhere, and there's no reason for people to be up there now, but when we were on the river, on our very first day, we saw a rusted out stovepipe, which most likely marked the site of like a prospector's tent or where a prospector stayed, right? And so back in the day, when uranium was booming, prospectors were dropped off all over the North Shore and like these crazy remote areas and spent months at a time looking for some sort of mineral deposit, right? These guys were crazy hardcore. This is before the days of like modern day breathable fabrics and like all kinds of modern day camping equipment and that sort of thing. These guys were dropped off like and spent months at a time exploring around these crazy rugged terrain, right? So that was sort of the first sign of people, and we were like, it's incredible to think of these guys way back in the day doing that kind of stuff. But when we made it to the lake and spoke with Mike, that guy on the North Shore, he sort of told us a story even preceding that of guys traveling the river, and it was this trapper who a lot of the geographic features in the area are named after him. His name was Old Man Ramstead is what he called him. But there's a Ramstead Island, which is right at the mouth of the Old Man River. And I imagine that the Old Man River is probably named after him as well. He was a trapper who didn't like people and loved to live alone on the lake and would travel up and down the Old Man to trap all the time. Rumor has that he died in a bear trap that he set himself. But again, all kinds of crazy rumors are going on up there. But it's crazy to think like these other canoeists that paddle through that river claim they never saw anything, didn't talk to anyone, didn't hear any stories, went out of there saying they were the first. But in reality, there's so much more history on that river, on that one tiny river, on that crazy remote section of Canada. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, pretty interesting.
It's the economic boom of you were saying drove people there.
Totally.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like I was so fascinated. We were like, it was a hard time that trip. We were exerting ourselves like an insane amount, going up crazy canyons, climbing down, doing all kinds of wild stuff. And like, again, we had a satellite phone, we had a float plane dropping us off, we had a boat or a float plane picking us up. Whereas like these guys would have been dropped off for weeks at a time, with half the equipment and like whatever. It's insane to think of these guys back in the day, right? Like so cool. I would have loved to have chatted with one of them and heard about his experiences up there, right? Like so fascinating, right? And all that was left behind was like a rusted out stovepipe and a few tent pegs. That's it, right? So so crazy, man. So crazy.
Well, it's really nice that Canada or a lot of like places in the north have like those like ski survival tents, you know, every
Totally.
you know whatever amounts of kilometers, which is really useful. You know, without those, there'd be a lot more problems up there.
For sure.
So you know, it's nice that they have those kind of resources. That,
Totally.
You know,
Totally.
for trappers and for
Yeah.
people that go up there. You know, it's and that's also a big problem with northern Canada is that, you know, it's being a land claim politically because there's not enough people living there. You know, there's not enough people there. You know, that it's, you know, enough of a presence to say, oh, this definitely belongs to these people, because, you know, a lot of the time there's a lot of different countries that claim the North Pole, right? They claim northern parts of Canada, and it's like, well, you know, it's really interesting to see that politics go down when you see the people there. They're definitely Canadian.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm actually reading a book by Farley Mowat on the discovery of the Northwest Passage and all the people that have tried to kind of figure it out, and they're all coming from Europe, and they're all staking claims of islands and different things as British or as whatever, you know, from all over the place. And you can see how the conflict has sort of started way back then when people sort of claim things for themselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty wild.
Well, that's kind of like the name of the game when you were back then, and being a prospector. It was definitely, you know, the chaos of claiming land and the chaos of doing all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine that. Like,
Well, yeah, man, these prospectors,
know?
like there's stories of some guys who struck it rich and some guys who never did.
Yeah.
And it's like a total risk when you go up there. Like
Oh,
some of these
yeah.
guys, I'm sure some of these guys never came back, right? Like
Yeah.
it's crazy, such a harsh environment. Like everyone in town, when we were about to go up there, they were like, they're familiar with the area. And we're saying we're headed to the river's called the Old Man River. We're headed to the Old Man River Valley. And these guys are like, man, you can't even take a snowmobile in there. It's like so mountainous, and you never expect Saskatchewan, but like legitimate rocky mountains and all kinds of crazy, just crazy harsh terrain. These guys are like, we would never go back in there with a snowmobile. You know, guys have tried, and we never do that. And like, you think of these guys back in the day with, like, you know, on foot or by canoe, who knows how they did it, but like they were going way back in there, way back in there.
that's right.
Insane, man, insane.
Well, just like think of the gold rush. Think of how many people died during the gold rush. There's a lot of people died just trying to going out there to get that prosperity. The gold rush in California, then they went north.
Yeah.
It was a game changer. But you know who made the most money off of the gold rush?
Who's that?
The people selling the shovels.
No way.
The people selling the supplies, or the people that made the most money.
Yeah, crazy.
And there's something has got to be said about that.
For
because
sure.
you know, it's kind of like you know, that you think you're having a good deal, or you think you're on the inside in a business decision, but turns out you're just one of the suckers that's being sold to this.
Sold the dream.
Exactly. Yeah. That's kind of the way it is, right?
Crazy.
Oh yeah. There's gold out there. Yeah, go dig for gold.
Go
Here, buy my shovel.
But you know, maybe the
Maybe I'll
guys,
strike it.
maybe the guys selling the shovels were richer in a from a money standpoint. But the guys going to look for the gold, I like to think, were richer in life experience. You know,
Absolutely, absolutely.
Those guys coming back with some wild stories and some
Yeah,
crazy
no kidding.
times. Some of them not coming back, but most, you know. But
It's definitely like it's definitely life decisions to go out there and to risk everything.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's part of me kind of wishes I could be alive back then to go and do that, but that's sort of what we have to do. Now we have to explore for different reasons. We're not looking for gold while we're out there, right? You know, just to have that unknown.
We're there spending money. We're not there to make money.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't
exactly what it is. Yeah.
Speaking of risking stuff,
Yeah.
do you mind taking us back to your incident?
Yeah. So Nick, I work with Nick, so he sort of knows. He's seen me in the sling, you know. So he sort of knows the
Sling.
backstory behind this. But yeah, so essentially, I guess the spring of 2018, so a year ago, or a year and a half ago, I was doing my usual. So typically in the springtime, that's when rivers start breaking up. So the usual circuit I would go on was I would start out east in Thunder Bay, Ontario, paddle the rivers on the North Shore because they're usually the first to go. And then once those rivers, they're really steep, really awesome whitewater, but they don't last long. So once those rivers stop flowing, then I'd drive across the country to Alberta and then BC and paddle out there. So that was the typical rotation. Yeah, typical start to the year. So May rolled around, just finished school, got the text from some friends out in Thunder Bay that like the rivers were starting to go, and again the window for those rivers are super small, so you drop everything, you take off out there. So rallied out to Thunder Bay, timed it perfectly, basically got out of the car, got on a river, paddled the river that night, paddled another river the next day, and then the third day of the trip, put onto another river, which I've paddled once before. The friend I was with from Manitoba had paddled it with me that one time. That one time we followed a local down. The rivers in Thunder Bay are like really long, really continuous, and just like pretty intense. But the main thing is that they're continuous, so you need to follow the local down the first time, just because like there's so many lines to remember, features to know about, portages to make, and like crazy moves and like really high consequence. And if you're not following someone, like it would take you days to run a river, whereas if you follow a local, he'll just show you the way, kind of thing. So usually when we go to these places, we make friends with the local, he shows you the routes, then you kind of have that in your repertoire. So this river is one I'd paddled once a year ago. We know a little bit about it. We don't know tons about it, but another one of our local friends, I used to paddle with him out west. He moved out to Thunder Bay, so he was like new to Thunder Bay, his first spring there. He wanted to paddle with us. He wanted to paddle this river. We're like, yeah, man, let's do it. So the way it works, a lot of these rivers, some have gauges, some don't. This river doesn't have a gauge, so you have to like use other rivers in the area to kind of gauge whether it's good or not. So we're like, yeah, I think it should be good. It makes sense that we paddle this other river. That one was good. This one should be fine. So we basically made our way down some logging roads to the top of the river. We left a vehicle at the bottom at Lake Superior, made our way to the top of the river, got to the top, and like this river, because it's pretty remote, you actually paddle a tributary into the river, then paddle the river itself. It's a one-day trip, but it's a pretty full one day. And so we put on this tributary, and this tributary is like 10 feet wide, maybe a little more than that, maybe a little less. Pretty small little river. So we put on, it's pretty nondescript for the first little while. It's just flowing really fast. You're just class one. You're just like drifting along, stretching, kind of getting ready for the craziness downstream. We basically come around a corner and like you drift for a few kilometers before any whitewater really starts. And again, this river's pretty nondescript, and it gets kind of technical at the end for the most part. And then you get into the main river. But we're drifting along. We also get to this railroad bridge, and where the year before we floated right underneath it, this year we're like, holy cow, the water's like pretty much touching the bridge. So like it is significantly higher than it was last year, but like we didn't know until now, right? So we're like, well, we can't paddle back upstream because the river's flowing too fast. Like I think we got to keep going. So we have a little discussion about it. We all get out, we walk around the bridge, we put back in, we keep going. But then it's like, okay, well, this is going to be a little more full on than it was last time. And we were hopeful that like just the tributary was higher, but the main river wouldn't be that much higher.
Sure.
So the tributary ends up being crazy high and crazy intense. We're like running like super technical hard whitewater in this like tiny little creek, and basically ended up making it without issue to the main river, only to find the main river is like even high, like flooding, like in the trees. So we're like, holy cow, what happened? Sure enough, in hindsight, we learned that like there was a crazy rainstorm that night. So even though we paddled the other river in the area and everything seemed good, there was a big rainstorm that night, and these rivers all spiked really quickly. So anyways, we get to the main river, and now we're like super committed, and it's like, wow, this thing is roosting. It's like literally in the trees. Like we would be on the shore, and like you'd be holding on to a tree, like just like in this thrashing, churning river. It was just insane. So there's three of us. Again, me and my friend Colin had been down the river once before. The other guy had never been down the river before, but like we're now trying to remember the lines. But it's like the river looks totally different because it's huge, right? So the awesome part was it was going really good. We were killing it as a trio. We were managing super well, and we were like all the training we'd had up to this point was just keeping us alive and good and having a blast. We weren't even like so scared that we weren't having fun. We were having like the time of our lives in there. It was awesome. Nice. But the kind of crux of the run is like this waterfall that like at high water, if you run it, you will die. We call it like I would call it class 6. Like if there are like tourists that have slipped off the rocks. Wow. At this point, you're kind of getting more close to the tourist section. Like there's tourists that have slipped off the rocks in the summertime when the water's way lower, and like they get sucked into a cave behind the waterfall. You don't find them again until the summertime when the water drops. Yeah, like terrible. It's like what I got. Not even that tall of a waterfall, but there's just like it's like probably like a 30-footer, but there's a huge cave behind it, and the water's just like pounding that cave. never be seen again, kind of deal. Insane. So, anyways, the main thing when you're coming up to that section is like you have to portage that waterfall. You cannot run that waterfall. But there's like kind of a sneak line because there's an island in the middle. We call it a sneak. So there's like a little bit of water going around the island and most of it going over the waterfall. So you have to get out before that and then like just scout the sneak line. Maybe you can do the sneak line. Maybe you can't. So we're trying to just remember where that is on the river because like you're bombing along the section. It's just a continuous whitewater, huge whitewater. And you're just like, is this the corner where the waterfall is? Or is this the corner as we're coming down these corners? Right?
There's no sign
No
that says
sign.
waterfall here.
So we actually got out at one point. We thought it was a waterfall. We got out early and we're like, oh no, it's not. Okay, let's get back in the river and keep going. Anyways, we ended up making it. We, as a team again, we pulled it together and like managed really well. Got out above the waterfall. We're like, whew, you know, we're in the clear pretty much for now. And we look at the sneak line, and the sneak line, which is normally just a trickle, is like roosting high because there's so much water in this river. And so the sneak line, essentially, like the height the waterfall falls, it falls the same distance. It's just like a cleaner drop.
Sure.
So we call clean means like less dangerous, less likely to die kind of deal. There's no cave on this one. So we scouted out, and it's actually like a bit of a drop, and there's like what we call a slide. So the rock is like sloping down. You slide along that, and there's another drop. So the whole thing dropping a good height, but it's kind of like more of a step type drop. So we look at it. It's really a technical line, but like one that we'd always run. Still class 5, but still manageable. And so just by chance, I said, I'll go first. You guys set safety for me, watch me go, and then you guys can bomb through. I'll wait at the bottom. So I went up, dropped in, basically coming down the rapid, was going really fast on the slide. So you're like skipping along like a water slide, and just clipped the rock with my paddle and dislocated my shoulder instantly. So ripped my shoulder out of its socket. My shoulder is now hanging out of its socket, and I'm like amidst the rapid at the kind of the crux section of it. So then I land at the first part of the drop. My shoulder's out. I'm trying to paddle to where I need to be for the second part, but I can't because my shoulder's out. So I'm trying to paddle. My friends are like, what the heck is he doing? Why is he not getting over where he needs to be? But I can't. Okay. And I end up flipping over, start running half this next slide on my head, but then I rolled up with my arm out. And then I went over the next part of the drop, landed at the bottom, flipped over again, rolled up again with my arm out, and then paddled ashore with my arm out because the river is just cooking super fast. Yeah. And I knew that like if I didn't get to shore, there's actually another unrunnable rapid just downstream. So it was like going to a situation where like I just had to paddle. So when your arm is out, when your shoulder is dislocated, you should not use it. You should be like immobilize that thing instantly. But like I just had to use it. So I was like paddling with this thing. And then basically to show my friends are all like, what happened? And I'm like, hey, I dislocated my shoulder. I'm like, adrenaline's pumping, so like the pain hadn't set in yet. Yeah. I'm like, I need you guys to pop back in for me. Yeah. So I've taken like lots of wilderness first aid courses and stuff, and I know how to pop a shoulder back in. And I'm pretty confident like if one of you guys dislocated your shoulder, I could pop your shoulder back in. But if you've never popped a shoulder back in, or if you don't know how to pop a shoulder back in, and someone who has their shoulder out is trying to describe how to pop a shoulder back in, doesn't always go very well. So anyways, I'm on the shore. I'm like talking to my friends, telling them how to do it, and they're trying to do it for me, and they're like looking at me like all pale. They look like they're gonna puke themselves.
Yeah, they're the ones that are more scared. Yeah, that's funny
because they're feeling it. It doesn't feel good, you know. Like you could feel like the
You're
arm.
Like, this is not right.
Yeah, this is not doesn't look normal, you know. So, anyways, they're pulling on me, and like essentially like you have to pull on it pretty hard. And the thing is, I also at this point had like reefed on it so good that the muscles are just like spasming like crazy because they're just like you know like I used it so much. And you're not supposed to. So basically, like they're trying to pop back in, and like at this point, after a while, I was like starting to fade in and out, kind of black out a bit.
Yeah.
And the other thing is we're pretty far from help at this point.
Yeah.
And I'm like pretty stubborn, and I'm like, okay, there's no way we're calling for help. Like we're gonna get out of this ourselves, kind of deal. Yeah, but it's also like we had the skills to do it, and like if you can do it, you might as well not waste resources and call in a helicopter kind of thing. So this is sort of the crazy part is that like the issue we had is that my vehicle's at the top, my friend's vehicle's at the bottom, we're somewhere in the middle. So like if we just hike out to the highway now, we're gonna end up on the highway and like have no way of getting to the hospital, right? We're outside of Thunder Bay quite a ways. Yeah. So essentially my friend Matt, who's a total badass. Can I say that on the
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Total badass. He's basically like, give me a verbal description of the rest of the river and I'll run it myself. and then I'll get to the vehicle, and you guys start hiking out, and I'll meet you on the highway and drive you to the hospital. So like in whitewater kayaking, you should never paddle alone, but you especially shouldn't paddle alone on like a flooded, really scary river. But like in my like semi-coherent description, I just described him the lines, described where he had to portage on the unrunnable rapid, and described where how to get through the rest of the section, and then just said like, "Okay, man, we'll see you in like a little while." And he just like disappeared on his own by himself, took off down the river, and then me and my friend started hiking out, and again, Colin, my friend, longtime friend of mine, he was super cool, kept me with it, kind of thing, kept us hiking along, but we essentially like had to bushwhack. There was a trail into that section of the river, but the river was so high it was flooded out. So we just basically like picked a direction, like I think the highway's that way, and just started bushwhacking. But it got a couple sections where there's like cliffs and stuff, and we like took us way longer than it should have, but we were just like walking, and eventually got to the highway. Right at that time, my friend showed up with a truck, got in the truck, took off to the hospital. All in all, from start to finish, this is the thing. So I guess when you dislocate your shoulder, if you're in a football game, dislocate your shoulder, you're usually at the hospital within like 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It's back in its socket in an hour.
Yeah.
You're good. You're recovered in like a couple weeks. In this situation, from the time I dislocated my shoulder to the time I got it put back into the hospital was 8 hours.
Wow.
So when your shoulder's out for that long, you have like crazy nerve damage and that sort of thing. So
wow, yeah.
In the end, it took me. My recovery was 8 months long to come back from that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy. So I actually like nearly severed my axillary nerve, which goes to your deltoid. So the muscle on the outside of my arm, which lifts your arm up, was totally dead.
Wow.
So I couldn't lift my arm. It was like
couldn't use it.
Couldn't use it. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty scary. Pretty scary stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
holy smokes, man! Nick was telling me about this, but like,
I told you this is a guest to get.
Holy
Yeah, and that's the thing
smokes.
too. Like when you were coming back to work after that, that was some, like you were like, yeah,
Hard
like,
times,
all
man.
right, here we go. This is as far as we can go.
Yeah.
You're showing us like, like how far, and like it was a take it easy thing, but you
Totally,
you
man.
still wanted to be there. So you still showed up like shortly, shortly after, but out of the 8 months, like you were only out
man.
for.
I think I was I had like 2 months off of work. So
Yeah, it was only 2.
yeah, I was
from what
gone for 2,
remember
and then
at
I came
work,
back. So you guys missed like the worst of it. But even when I came
Yeah.
back, like I think I still couldn't lift my arm above my like. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was pretty limited.
Yeah.
And it was one of these things where like I've never been injured like that. Where like I basically had to start like baby steps. Like I remember my friends were watching one time. I was like laying on the floor and like with 50, I was bench pressing a broomstick. And I was just shaking. Like I just like you're starting from scratch, man. Like I
Yeah.
just got nothing left. Like it was just like the nerve stuff is like totally complicates the situation. Like basically like nerves regenerate so slowly and the recovery is so long because like it grows at like a millimeter or 2. I can't remember what it is, a month or something like that. It's crazy slow.
Wow.
So yeah, it just took forever to come back. But for the most part, it's been back to about 75% since I'm back. But that's about as good as it'll be.
wow.
Yeah.
You're still gonna go. You're not deterred from going.
Yeah. I think like that sort of changed my perspective a little bit. Like I used to have like this hunger to like do really, really scary stuff all the time. Now it's like I like to scare myself in remote areas doing exploratory stuff, but like I'm not looking to run the biggest waterfall anymore. That was sort of my motivation back in the day. But like with some of those things, like running a really big waterfall, it's just like a lot of risk, and the reward is sort of, now I see that the reward might not be worth the months of recovery type thing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, at this age too, it's like
Yeah.
that's almost a year, and you're like 22 at the time. And
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
that's a lot of At this point, it's a lot of
Yeah, no, for sure.
And now we're in the prime of our physical capabilities, or
Yeah.
we're about to hit it, I guess, and
Definitely.
or soon, and we're trying to keep that.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is it.
I think like every like 20-year-old male thinks he's invincible. Like it's just like a natural thing. And so like I think you kind of need like a wake up call at some point. And so like mine was maybe a little harsher than most, but yeah, it's definitely like. And I think I like to try to make good decisions. And to be honest, if I was putting that at that same rapid tomorrow, I'd probably still run it. Like it's still within the threshold of what I do.
But
on
you
a
did
regular
so
basis.
much like at that it was so saturated in terms of like what you wanted to do, and you're pursuing that at that age already, like
Yeah.
so
Yeah, no, it's
a lot
awesome.
of people don't get to do get that full into what they want to do
For
and
sure,
go that
man.
far with it at that point, so it's
For sure, man.
still.
Yeah, part of me thinks like if it didn't happen then, it probably would have I probably would have had something bad happen in that season. Like it just the it's just the natural way things work. The more you start dancing with the devil, the more likely something bad might happen. So, it's probably like a wake up call I needed, and it could have been a lot worse, and it could have been, so I'm fortunate in that sense. So yeah, it's not so bad.
That's good.
Crazy story, yeah. Yeah. My mom, when this all went down, I had to tell my mom the story, and she's just like so upset at me. Just not the reaction you want when you're like all in a sling, all in rough shape. Your mom's like yelling at you. But it's just like a build up of all the years of stress, I guess. Yeah, so
Well, she should be happier you made it home.
Yeah, exactly. There was that for sure. But more so like you could have died. What are you thinking?
The worst you got was a dislocated shoulder.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty.
Yeah,
that's minor, but
I actually
could have been a lot worse.
I got smashed up like my body pretty good too because I did run like half the waterfall in my head. So but the crazy part is those GoPros, how they come in like indestructible cases.
Sure.
Well, actually, I smacked my head so hard that I actually smashed the GoPro. Like the housing completely smashed and the GoPro's gone.
Wow.
So it's at the bottom of the river somewhere.
Damn. Someone's gonna find that footage like, oh damn, this guy's dead. Holy shit. Like
seriously, yeah.
Someone wants to know, like
that's hilarious.
Someone's gonna find that and bring it back one day. Like, yo.
Well, that section of the river in the summertime actually totally dries up. So I guaranteed someone could probably find the pieces of it if they wanted to.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, man, pretty crazy. So
damn.
That's awesome. So I think we're past the 1 hour mark, man.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy, man.
So
That went
we're
fast.
doing
Holy
good.
cow.
Right?
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Well, man, I really appreciate you coming on and we're sharing all these amazing wild stories. Nick is great for bringing these people on. Man. Oh my god. So I mean, we'll definitely have to keep in touch.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll get you back on at some point.
For sure.
And yeah, bring us some more juicy stories.
Yeah, hopefully no injuries,
Yeah.
but I'll
No-
for sure have
no
some more
story.
exploration stories for you.
That's good, man.
Cheers,
Well,
man.
it's been exciting, and I really appreciate everything
For
you've
sure,
done,
man.
man.
It's been an absolute
What a wild
pleasure, man.
ride.
Thanks
Yeah.
for having
Thanks so
me, man.
much.
Thank you.
Take care, man.
Cheers.
Take care, man.
All the
All right.
best.
Nicola.
Beautiful. All right.
How you like that?
That was good, man. Pro style.